March 19, 1972. A dusty ranch outside Dripping Springs, Texas. The so-called country Woodstock is limping to a close. Promoters had expected 60,000 people a day. Barely 12,000 showed up for the entire three-day festival. But backstage, in a cramped trailer, something is happening that will change country music forever. A scruffy songwriter with 2 missing fingers, lost in a sawmill accident, is playing guitar for anyone who'll listen. His name is Billy Joe Shaver, and he's broke, desperate, and running out of time. Then Waylon Jennings pokes his head through the door. "Do you have any more of them cowboy songs?" "I have a whole sack full of them," Shaver replies. Jennings makes a promise. "Come to Nashville. I'll record a whole album of your songs." 6 months later, that promise would lead to a hallway confrontation, a threatened ass-kicking, and an album that would tear down everything Nashville had built. This is the story of Honky Tonk Heroes, the album Chet Atkins tried to block, RCA Records tried to bury, and critics dismissed as uncommercial, the album that proved you could fight the music industry from the inside and win. Welcome to the Sound Vault. Every album has a story. This is how Waylon Jennings started a revolution. To understand why Honky Tonk Heroes mattered, you need to understand what Nashville had become by 1972. The Nashville sound, clean, polished, safe. Producer Chet Atkins and his colleagues had spent the 1960s smoothing out country music's rough edges. Gone were the fiddles and steel guitars. In came lush string arrangements, background vocals, and pop sensibilities designed to cross over to mainstream radio. It worked. Country music reached new audiences. Sales soared. Nashville became a machine. But it was a machine that crushed artists who didn't fit the mold. Waylon Arnold Jennings knew this better than anyone. Born June 15, 1937, in Littlefield, Texas, Jennings had country music in his blood. At 8 years old, he was learning guitar. At 14, he had his own radio show. By his late teens, he dropped out of high school to become a musician. In 1958, his life intersected with rock and roll history. Buddy Holly hired the 21-year-old Jennings to play bass for the Crickets. On February 2, 1959, Holly chartered a small plane to fly from Clear Lake, Iowa to Moorhead, Minnesota. The weather was terrible. Jennings gave up his seat on that plane to J.P. the Big Bopper, Richardson. The plane crashed just after takeoff. Holly, Richardson, and Ritchie Valens died. Jennings survived because of a last-minute decision. He would spend years haunted by that night. Holly's last words to him said jokingly, "I hope your old bus freezes up." Jennings' response, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." After Holly's death, Jennings retreated to Texas and Arizona, playing small clubs and working as a DJ. In 1964, at a nightclub called JD's in Tempe, Arizona, he formed a band with drummer Richie Albright. They called themselves the Wailers. They developed a following. The sound was different, harder, with more rock influence than traditional country. Bobby Bare, a successful country singer, heard Jennings at JD's and was impressed enough to call Chet Atkins at RCA Records. In 1965, Atkins signed Jennings. It should have been the break Jennings needed. Instead, it became a decade-long battle. Nashville had rules. You recorded with session musicians, not your own band. Producers chose your songs. You showed up, sang what you were told, and left. The formula had worked for Patsy Cline, Jim Reeves, and dozens of others. But Jennings had played with Buddy Holly. He knew rock musicians controlled their own sound. They used their own bands. They chose their own songs. They had creative freedom. Nashville wouldn't give him that. "I was accustomed to performing and recording with my own band," Jennings later said. That wasn't encouraged by powerful Nashville producers. For years, he followed their rules. He recorded their songs with their musicians. Albums came out. Folk Country in 1966, Love of the Common People in 1967, Only the Greatest in 1968. They sold respectably. Nothing spectacular. By 1972, Jennings was creatively suffocated and financially broken. RCA's booking agency sent him on grueling tours, sometimes 300 days a year, often scheduling venues hundreds of miles apart on consecutive nights. After paying for accommodation and travel, Jennings had nothing left. He started requesting advances from RCA just to make it to the next show. To cope with the exhaustion, he started using amphetamines. The pills kept him awake. The debt kept him trapped. As he later put it, he felt trapped on the circuit. His personal life was equally messy. His second marriage collapsed in 1967. His third marriage lasted barely 2 years. He was drinking heavily. The drugs were becoming a problem. In 1972, after the release of Ladies Love Outlaws, his recording contract was about to expire. Then he contracted hepatitis and was hospitalized. Lying in that hospital bed, sick and broke and exhausted, Waylon Jennings was seriously considering quitting music entirely. That's when Richie Albright came to visit. "There's another way of doing things," Albright told him. "And that's rock and roll." Albright convinced Jennings to hire Neil Reshen, a tough New York lawyer who specialized in renegotiating music contracts. It was the decision that changed everything. Neil Reshen was exactly what Jennings needed, a shark in a business suit. Reshen looked at Jennings's RCA contract and saw what amounted to indentured servitude. After years of touring and recording, Jennings was deep in debt to his own label. The royalty rate was abysmal, 5%. He had zero creative control. Meanwhile, RCA was worried. Willie Nelson, another country star frustrated with Nashville's restrictions, had left RCA for Atlantic Records. Nelson was relocating to Austin, Texas, and building buzz by attracting rock audiences to his shows. If RCA lost both Nelson and Jennings, they'd look foolish. Reshen understood leverage. He set up a meeting at a Nashville airport where Jennings introduced him to Willie Nelson. By the end of that meeting, Reshen was managing both artists. Then Reshen went to RCA with a simple message: "Give Waylon what he wants, or lose him the way you lost Willie." The negotiations were brutal. RCA initially offered Jennings a $5,000 bonus to sign a new contract with the same terrible terms. Reshen rejected it immediately. Finally, RCA caved. The new contract included a $75,000 advance and, crucially, near-complete artistic control. Jennings could use his own band, choose his own songs, produce his own records. Reshen even advised Jennings on image. "Keep the beard you grew in the hospital," he said. "Match the outlaw look." It was unprecedented. No country artist had ever secured this level of control from a major Nashville label. In 1973, Jennings released 2 albums under his new contract: Lonesome, Ornery and Mean in January, and Honky Tonk Heroes in July. Both were recorded with the Wailers. Both rejected the Nashville sound. Both sounded rawer, tougher, more real. But Honky Tonk Heroes was different, because of Billy Joe Shaver. The Dripping Springs reunion in March 1972 was supposed to be country music's Woodstock. Dallas promoters invested $250,000. They booked legends: Loretta Lynn, Buck Owens, Merle Haggard, Roy Acuff, Bill Monroe. They also booked the scruffy outsiders: Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Chris Christopherson. Rolling Stone sent photographer Annie Leibovitz. Everyone expected massive crowds. Instead, barely 20,000 people showed up over 3 days. Friday's bluegrass lineup drew only 2,000. Sunday, with Willie, Waylon, and Chris, pulled 12,000. Financially, it was a disaster. Artistically, it was revolutionary. Backstage, musicians gathered for informal jam sessions. Billy Joe Shaver, unknown and uninvited, was playing guitar in a trailer, hoping someone, anyone, would hear his songs. Shaver's life had been hard. Born in Corsicana, Texas in 1939, he grew up in a honky-tonk bar his mother ran. He dropped out of high school, he picked cotton, he joined the Navy, he lost 2 fingers in a sawmill accident, but he could write songs. Raw, poetic songs about outlaws and wanderers and hard-living heroes. He'd written Old Five and Dimers Like Me, Ride Me Down Easy, Honky Tonk Heroes. Songs that spoke in the language of Texas. Unpolished, direct, real. Nashville didn't know what to do with him. A few artists had recorded his songs: Bobby Bare, Chris Christopherson. But Shaver was still broke and unknown. At Dripping Springs, Shaver sang Willie the Wanderin' Gypsy and Me. Waylon Jennings happened to walk past the trailer and stopped. "Do you have any more of them cowboy songs?" "I have a whole sack full of them." "If they're as good as that one," Jennings said, "I'll record a whole album of them." For Shaver, it was a lifeline. Waylon Jennings was one of the biggest stars in country music. An entire album would change everything. There was just one problem. Waylon was probably drunk when he made that promise. And Waylon Jennings made a lot of promises when he was drunk. Billy Joe Shaver arrived in Nashville believing Waylon Jennings meant what he said. For 6 months, he tried to reach Jennings. He called his manager. He showed up at studios. He waited outside recording sessions. Jennings avoided him. "Lauren called me and said she was behind and had to get it done. She didn't know how the arrangement of the song went, so we went and got a copy from Coconuts or Sam Goody. I had a little 1-room 16-track studio in my apartment in Jersey." Lauren was 8 months pregnant, laying on her back on the floor, half asleep, holding a handheld mic. She did all of those vocals off the top of her head pretty much in one take. with the beatbox and all of that. Shaver was broke, washing dishes, taking odd jobs. He'd burned bridges in Texas to come to Nashville. He had nothing left. Then, late one night, a DJ friend named Captain Midnight got Shaver into one of Jennings's recording sessions. Jennings found out Shaver was there. He sent Midnight back with a $100 bill folded into a tiny square. "Give this to him and tell him to get lost." Shaver took the money. For a moment he considered taking it. He was broke. $100 was a lot. Then he threw it back. "You tell Waylon," Shaver said, "to stick this up his ass." Finally, Shaver cornered Jennings in a hallway at Hillbilly Central, the renegade studio run by Tompall Glaser, just blocks from Music Row. Jennings emerged from the control room. He had two Hells Angels bikers with him, friends who often served as informal bodyguards. Shaver didn't care. "I got these songs you promised to listen to," Shaver said, his voice rising. "And if you don't listen to them, I'm gonna whip your ass right here in front of God and everybody." The hallway went silent. The bikers started moving toward Shaver. Jennings raised a hand, stopping them. He sat down with Shaver. They talked. Shaver played his songs. "Ain't No God in Mexico," "Old Five and Dimers Like Me," "Black Rose," "Ride Me Down Easy." Jennings listened to all of them. Then he stood up. "These are good, Hoss. Let's make that album." But he added with a slight smile, "You have no idea how close you came to getting killed." Tompall Glaser's Hillbilly Central was everything Nashville's establishment studios weren't. Located at 9016 19th Avenue South, just 2 blocks from Music Row, it was a creative haven for misfits. The building housed a recording studio, a publishing company, and a hangout space where outcasts gathered. Tompall Glaser was the perfect host for a revolution. Born in Spalding, Nebraska in 1933, he'd come to Nashville in the 1960s with his brothers Jim and Chuck. They'd performed as Tompall and the Glaser Brothers, singing backup for Marty Robbins and Johnny Cash. But Tompall was a businessman too. When "Gentle on My Mind," a song the Glazers had invested in through their publishing company, became a massive hit for Glenn Campbell, the brothers used their profits to build a studio. Hillbilly Central opened in the early 1970s. Its atmosphere was loose, creative, rebellious. Willie Nelson lounged on the front lawn. Waylon haunted the place at 3 a.m. Chris Christopherson, John Hartford, Kinky Friedman, all the artists frustrated with Nashville's restrictions, gathered there. No suits, no rules, no Chet Atkins telling you what to do. Hazel Smith, the studio's secretary and publicist, would later coin the term outlaws to describe the Hillbilly Central crowd. Waylon Jennings loved it. He and Tompall had become close friends after the Glaser brothers broke up. "Tompall and I were best friends," Jennings wrote in his autobiography. "We met at about the time he broke up with his brothers, and I kind of took their place in his life." When Jennings decided to record Billy Joe Shaver's songs, he brought Tompall on as co-producer. He also brought his own band, the Wailers. RCA's studio system used experienced session musicians who could read charts and nail songs in 1 or 2 takes. They were professionals. They were also interchangeable. The Wailers were different. Richie Albright on drums brought a rock-influenced drive that pushed the rhythm. The band had been playing together for years. They knew each other's instincts. More importantly, they sounded like Waylon's live shows. Rough, energetic, real. Recording began at RCA Studio A in Nashville. Not at Hillbilly Central, as is sometimes reported, though the album was assembled there. Chet Atkins wanted nothing to do with it. Atkins saw the album as a risk. Shaver was untested. The songs were unconventional. The production lacked the polish Atkins valued. He tried to stop the release. But Jennings had creative control now. There was nothing Atkins could do. Recording Honky Tonk Heroes was not smooth. Billy Joe Shaver had written these songs. He knew exactly how they should sound, and Waylon Jennings was doing them wrong. The title track was especially problematic. Shaver wanted it played one way. Jennings had other ideas. The two argued in the studio, voices rising. Richie Albright, Jennings' drummer, later recalled, "We were doing the album and Billy Joe was around, and we began Honky Tonk Heroes. We cut the first part of the song and stopped, and Waylon said, 'This is the way we're going to do it.' Billy Joe had been sitting in the back and he came walking up saying, 'What are you doing? You're fucking up my song. That ain't the way it goes.' Pretty soon Waylon and Billy Joe were just hollering at one another. Billy Joe didn't understand the way we were putting it together." Jennings added a halftime breakdown at the end of the title track. Shaver hated it. He thought it ruined the song's momentum. At one point, Jennings had had enough. He gave Captain Midnight another $100 bill. "Give this to Billy Joe and tell him to get the fuck out of here and stay away." Shaver threw the money back. again. You tell Waylon to stick this up his ass. But when Jennings and the Wailers finished recording Honky Tonk Heroes, Shaver heard the playback. He had to admit it. Yeah, that's good. That's the way it goes. The album came together over several weeks. Jennings and Shaver even co-wrote one song together, You Asked Me To, sitting in Bobby Bare's office. 9 of the album's 10 tracks were written or co-written by Billy Joe Shaver. Only one wasn't. RCA insisted on adding We Had It All, a song written by Troy Seals and Donnie Fritz. It had already been a top 10 hit. The label wanted something familiar, something safe, something that might get radio play. Jennings initially considered other non-Shaver songs. Steve Young's 7 Bridges Road, which would later become a hit for the Eagles, Jimmy Rogers' T for Texas, and Shel Silverstein's The Leaving Coming On. He settled on We Had It All. It was a beautiful song. Elvis Presley would later record it. But it was also the album's weakest track, the only one that didn't fit the outlaw ethos Jennings and Shaver were building. RCA Records did not want to release Honky Tonk Heroes. Chet Atkins tried to block it. Label executives delayed it. They saw it as uncommercial, risky, and potentially damaging to Jennings' career. Finally, in July 1973, the album hit stores. The cover showed Waylon Jennings in black leather, long hair, and a beard. He looked nothing like the clean-cut country singers Music Row preferred. He looked like an outlaw. The music inside matched the image. The title track opened the album with swagger and defiance. Billy Joe Shaver's lyrics painted a world of lovable losers and no-account boozers and honky-tonk heroes like me. Jennings' voice, weathered, confident, slightly menacing, made every line believable. Black Rose told a story of temptation and bad decisions. The devil made me do it the first time, Jennings sang. The second time, the third time, those were on him. Old Five and dimers like me celebrated life on the margins. Shaver had grown up in his mother's honky-tonk bar, and the song captured that world perfectly. Ain't No God in Mexico was the song that had convinced Jennings to record the album in the first place. It told the story of a man fleeing to Mexico to escape his sins. Omaha and Willie the Wandering Gypsy and Me continued the themes. Restlessness, wandering, the search for something real in a phony world. Ride Me Down Easy was perhaps the album's most beautiful moment. A dying man's prayer for mercy. Honky Tonk Heroes sounded like nothing else Nashville was producing. The production was bare bones. The Wailers played with rock energy. Jennings' vocals were raw and unpolished. It was exactly what country music needed. Critics loved it. Rolling Stone wrote, after many years of overproduction on record, Waylon Jennings' new album offers an opportunity to hear the crisp, robust, no-nonsense sound, which has been his trademark since his early days with Buddy Holly's Crickets. The Chicago Tribune noted Jennings' new look. Longish, straggly hair, beginnings of a beard, black leather, laid back, and called the album a pretty powerful example of both the old and new Waylon. Music Journal described it as certainly brash, lively, and down-to-earth. Commercial success was more moderate. The album reached number 14 on Billboard's Top Country Albums chart and number 185 on the Billboard 200. The single, You Asked Me To, peaked at number 8 on the country charts. We Had It All reached number 28. By Nashville standards, it was respectable but not spectacular. Jennings' previous album, Lonesome, Ornery, and Mean, had peaked higher at number 8. But sales numbers didn't tell the real story. Honky Tonk Heroes wasn't just an album. It was a declaration of independence. Within months of Honky Tonk Heroes' release, the country music landscape began to shift. Willie Nelson, now based in Austin, released Shotgun Willie on Atlantic Records 2 weeks before Honky Tonk Heroes. It was rawer, more rock-influenced than his previous work. Later in 1973, Jerry Jeff Walker released Viva Terlingua, a live album recorded in Luckenbach, Texas, that captured the spirit of Texas country rock. These albums weren't isolated experiments. They were part of a growing rebellion against Nashville's control. The term outlaw country began to spread. Hazel Smith at Hillbilly Central had coined it to describe Waylon, Willie, and their crowd. The name stuck. By 1975, the outlaw movement was undeniable. Jennings released Dreaming My Dreams, which went to number 1 on the country charts. Willie Nelson released Red-Headed Stranger, a spare acoustic album that became a massive commercial and critical success. Then came 1976. RCA Records assembled a compilation album featuring tracks by Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Jessie Coulter, Jennings' wife, and Tompall Glaser. They called it Wanted the Outlaws. The album featured previously released material plus 4 new tracks. The cover depicted the 4 artists as Old West outlaws, wanted posters and all. Released in January 1976, Wanted, The Outlaws, rocketed to number 1 on the country charts and number 10 on the pop charts. Driven by hit singles Suspicious Minds, Jennings and Coulter, and Good-Hearted Woman, Jennings and Nelson, the album sold 1 million copies. It became the first country album ever certified platinum. Nashville couldn't ignore the Outlaws anymore. The movement they'd tried to suppress had become the biggest commercial success in country music history. The impact extended beyond sales. Outlaw country forced the entire industry to loosen its grip. Artists demanded more creative control. Independent studios opened across Nashville. The rigid Nashville sound began to crack. Honky Tonk Heroes had lit the fuse. Wanted, The Outlaws was the explosion. For Billy Joe Shaver, Honky Tonk Heroes was both a blessing and a curse. The album put his songs on the map. Waylon Jennings' versions of Old Five and Dimers Like Me, Black Rose, and Ride Me Down Easy introduced Shaver's writing to millions. Other artists started recording his work: Johnny Cash, Kris Kristofferson, even Elvis Presley. Shaver's I'm Just an Old Chunk of Coal, But I'm Gonna Be a Diamond Someday became a hit for John Anderson in 1981. But Shaver never became a star himself. He released his own album, Old Five and Dimers Like Me, in 1973. Critics loved it. Fans didn't care. It sold poorly. The songs were so big, they were too big for me, Shaver later admitted. I couldn't possibly get them across the way Waylon could. For the rest of his career, Shaver remained what Willie Nelson once called the greatest living songwriter. Respected by musicians, largely unknown to the public. He also lived the hard life his songs described. 3 marriages, all to the same woman. The divorces just didn't seem to work out, he joked. Heavy drinking, bar fights. In 2007, he shot a man in the face outside a bar near Waco, Texas. A jury acquitted him on self-defense grounds. He continued writing and performing until his death in 2020 at age 81. For Waylon Jennings, Honky Tonk Heroes launched the most successful period of his career. Following the album, Jennings released a string of hits. This time, 1974. Dreaming My Dreams, 1975. Are You Ready for the Country, 1976. 4 consecutive #1 albums. 6 straight albums certified gold or platinum. In 1977, he had his first major crossover pop hit with Lukenbach, Texas, Back to the Basics of Love. In 1978, he and Willie Nelson released Waylon and Willie, which went triple platinum. From 1979 to 1985, Jennings sang the theme song for The Dukes of Hazzard, a TV show about good old boys running from the law. It was perfect. But success came with a price. Jennings's cocaine addiction, which had begun with amphetamines in the early days, spiraled out of control in the late 1970s. At his peak, he was spending $1,500 a day on cocaine. I was snorting an ounce of cocaine a day, he later admitted. The drug destroyed his health, his relationships, and nearly his career. In 1984, he checked into rehab. He got clean and stayed clean for the rest of his life. His relationship with Tompall Glaser, the co-producer of Honky Tonk Heroes and his close friend, eventually soured. Glaser felt Jennings abandoned him as fame grew. The 2 men fell out, and Hillbilly Central eventually closed. Jennings continued recording through the 1980s and 1990s, though never again with the revolutionary impact of the mid-1970s. In 1985, he formed the Highwaymen with Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Kris Kristofferson, a supergroup of outlaw legends that released 3 albums. He was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 2001. On February 13, 2002, Waylon Jennings died of complications from diabetes. He was 64 years old. 50 years after its release, Honky Tonk Heroes stands as a pivotal moment in American music history. It proved that artists could fight the Nashville establishment from within and win. It demonstrated that raw, authentic country music could be commercially successful. It opened doors that would never fully close. The album's influence can be heard in every country artist who's prioritized authenticity over commercial polish. Listen to Steve Earle's Guitar Town, 1986, the working class perspective, the rock energy, the refusal to compromise. That's the spirit of Honky Tonk Heroes. Listen to Dwight Yoakam's Guitars, Cadillacs, etc., etc., 1986, the return to honky tonk roots mixed with California rock. That's the outlaw legacy. Listen to Sturgill Simpson's Metamodern Sounds in Country Music, 2014. The genre blending, the lyrical depth, the artistic independence. That's what Waylon and Billy Joe started. Listen to Chris Stapleton, Tyler Childers, Margot Price. Every modern country artist who values artistic freedom over Nashville's formulas owes a debt to Honky Tonk Heroes, the album christened the outlaw country era. As music journalist Michael Stryskuth wrote, "It bathed in risk, having gambled on the work of an untested songwriter. That gamble paid off, not just commercially but culturally. Honky Tonk Heroes proved that country music didn't have to choose between authenticity and success. It could be both raw and popular. It could honor tradition while sounding contemporary. It could tell hard truths and still find an audience." The legend behind the album, Billy Joe Shaver threatening to fight Waylon Jennings in a hallway, has taken on mythic proportions. It's a perfect outlaw story. The underdog standing up to the star, refusing to back down, and earning respect through sheer audacity. Whether that confrontation happened exactly as reported doesn't really matter. The story endures because it captures something true about the outlaw spirit: a refusal to be dismissed, a willingness to fight for your art, and the courage to demand what you've earned. In 2013, RCA Records reissued Honky Tonk Heroes with remastered audio and bonus tracks. Critics revisited the album with fresh ears and found it still sounded vital. "One of country music's landmark albums," wrote Kenneth Burns in the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Stephen Thomas Erlewine at AllMusic called it the album where Jennings found the perfect author for his obsessions, his fascinations, and his very image. Billy Joe Shaver in his later years reflected on the album with pride and a hint of wistfulness. "It's the touchstone of the outlaw movement," he said. "He never got rich from it." Jennings later admitted he'd cut Shaver out of some publishing rights. "I still don't think I've ever seen a dime on it," Shaver said about one song. "But he got something money couldn't buy: immortality." His songs, sung by Waylon Jennings with the Wailers, captured a moment when country music could have gone either way: Nashville or Texas, Polish or grit, safety or risk. Honky Tonk Heroes chose risk. And in choosing risk, it changed everything. Waylon Jennings sang about lovable losers and no-account boozers and honky tonk heroes like me. He was singing about himself. He was singing about Billy Joe Shaver. He was singing about every artist who'd ever been told their music wasn't commercial enough, wasn't polished enough, wasn't Nashville enough. And in 1973, standing in RCA's Studio A with his own band, recording songs by an unknown songwriter, defying Chet Atkins and the entire Nashville establishment, Waylon Jennings proved something that still resonates today. Sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply being yourself. This has been the Sound Vault. Every album has a story. And some stories, like Honky Tonk Heroes, remind us that the best art comes from fighting for what you believe in, even if you have to threaten to kick someone's ass to get it heard.